Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Tim Dimmick, and as your host for today's show, as we continue with our Real Estate Trendsetter Series, we've put together this series here on Business Innovators Radio, where we invite top producing realtors to talk about different segments of the real estate transaction that one will face as a buyer or a seller. We invited these professionals to come in and share their expertise to help consumers better understand the process and the dynamics involved in a real estate transaction. Today we have with us Tom Skiffington of RE/MAX 440. Tom has been a real estate broker for the past 28 years and manages 10 offices in the Bucks, Montgomery, and Lehigh County areas of Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
We're certainly glad to have you here. So we brought you onto the show today to discuss the topic of accepting the offer. This certainly has to be one of the most exciting parts of the real estate transaction for all parties involved. After all the preparation of getting your home on the market, going through the process of showing your home multiple times, you finally get to the point where somebody raises their hand and says, "I want your house," and presents you with an agreement of sale to purchase your home. So Tom, when this occurs, what are the key items that you look for when receiving an agreement of sale? And what should be at the forefront when presenting that agreement to your sellers?
Well, there's many things we look for, but the main item is the qualifications of the buyer. And obviously you want to make sure that that transaction gets to the settlement table. So as a realtor, we look for the qualifications of the buyer, proof of those qualifications, a pre-qualification from a lender, as well as a buyer's financial. That's the representation of the buyer, of their financials, as well as the other key ingredients, obviously price, settlement date, the contingencies. That's mainly what you look for. But with the financials, I really look for the BFI, and I compare that to the pre-approval, because many times there are things that are missed because the client did not tell the lender, or vice versa. The lender did not know about it, and so you want to see if there's any discrepancies between the two documents.
Great. Yeah. It is so important until that lender actually looks at those documents and really approves them or pre-approves them or pre-qualifies them. You know, there's a lot of balls in the air and things that can go wrong. So that's some great advice. So let's face it, sellers always want to get the most for their property. Buyers want to pay as little as they can for the property. So that being said, in most situations, I'm sure you receive, an offer that is typically less than the asking price. How do you address an offer that is lower than the asking price, and what are the factors that play into making a good counteroffer at that point?
Well, again, that's where the BFI can come in. I look at the buyer's financial, see what the buyer is qualified to go up to, or what they're capable of doing, and then typically we try and look at where the seller is and what the value of the property truly is, and then try and counter at a reasonable offer that will not scare off the buyer, and then it's also feasible for them to do. One example is always the seller assist. A lot of sellers get upset about seller's assist and says, "I'm not helping the buyer, I'm not paying for the buyer's closing costs." Reality is it really doesn't matter as long as your net number is the same. So you don't want to counter it eliminating the seller assist if the buyer is incapable of performing at that point. So if they need that seller assist, you need to counter the price and keep the seller assist intact.
So in essence, what I hear you saying, Tom, is if you determine by looking at the buyer's financial that they're cutting it close on funds to close, that you're actually better off as the seller leaving that seller assist intact because it gives them the ability to have the money to close and in turn go back at a higher price, which their loan amount is going to be based off of the sale price. So in essence, they're financing that increase in cost or increase in offer to in turn have the seller assist that will help them get the loan closed.
What you said actually makes a good point, and I think it's important to specify. A lot of sellers think, "Oh, I'm paying all this." Reality is buyer's financing it.
Right.
Exactly what you're saying. You're paying a higher price. You're really just financing those closing costs, and every $1,000 is a couple bucks a month. So it is better for the buyer. And I think if agents present that to the seller that way and they can see that, they understand it a little better because it's really not them paying it. It's the buyer financing.
Right. Right. So now let's look at the opposite scenario. Let's say you list your property and within the first week or two you receive multiple offers. Although the initial reaction from the seller is going to be to take the higher price, that's not always the best case scenario. So how do you address multiple offers, and what factors, being the seller, should you be considering when comparing those offers?
Well, you make a great point, because most sellers do look just for the highest price, and that is not the best. Many things you look at is the type of financing. Is it a government program which will require work to the property? Is the property qualify for that, or is the seller going to have to put money into it to bring it up to the standards of those financing programs? The other thing you want to look at is the buyer's qualification. You have a buyer that is borderline qualifying, being maxed out, versus another buyer that's putting 20% down. The 20% down buyer or cash buyer obviously is a lot better buyer than somebody that is borderline qualifying, going FHA or USDA or VA. So they need to look at all the terms. Obviously, also, we look at settlement date. It's funny because people don't always look at that, but houses cost money the longer you keep them.
Sure.
So a quicker settlement date can potentially save the seller money and also risk. The longer the settlement date, the more the odds are higher that something's going to go wrong with that transaction and potentially not close. So I think you got to look at all the factors when making that decision. $500 or $1,000 difference doesn't always make the best advice for accepting that offer.
Yeah. The type of loan, what people don't realize is the things that you may or may not be required to do, as you said, can really change that whole structure of that deal. And that $1,000 or $2,000, you're going to end up spending it in repairs or what have you, maybe to meet the standards of, a government loan, like you said. So those are some great points. What are the most common mistakes that you see sellers make when it comes time to accept an offer?
Well, there's several, but being inflexible, or they don't, like I had one the other day, they did not like the buyer that came through. Well, you know what? I always say take the emotion out of it. Look at, what the terms of that contract are, and just because somebody came in low, don't feel insulted. Counter the offer. Sometimes they say, oh, it's too low, so don't even bother. Well, you lost an opportunity, which, again, you may not come to terms, and they may continue to be low, but you need to at least go through the process to determine, can you get them to the terms that you want, and take the emotional part out of it. Look at it as a business transaction, treat it as such, and negotiate fairly with all parties, and you're more likely to be successful.
I'll tell you, Tom, that may be the best piece of advice I've heard in a long time, and I totally agree with you that it's imperative to remove all the emotion that you can from the deal and to realize that no situation is the same. There's absolutely 100 different scenarios on both sides of the deal and factor into coming to an agreement, which is, again, really the main reason why you want to be dealing with an experienced realtor. Well, unfortunately, that about wraps it up for today. I want to thank our guest, Tom Skiffington, for taking the time to join us and sharing his wealth of real estate knowledge. But before we go, Tom, if we have any listeners that have additional questions or would like to speak with you, how can they get in contact with you?
They could call me at any time at my office at 215-453-7883, or my email is tskiffington@remax.net, and website is tomskiffington.com.
Great, Tom. I appreciate your time again. And to our listeners, please stay tuned as we continue to bring additional interviews with top producing realtors in our Real Estate Trendsetter Series.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.